So let's take a little look at performance of the campaign as a whole. It certainly got better as the campaign went on. There was an update about midway through that made some quite significant changes. And my understanding is that we can expect some more tweaks to improve performance in the not too distant future. I had around 30 to 100 frames per second in some of the earlier missions. And I also noticed there was a fair amount of stutter. 30 being the frame rate I was getting down low, maybe a little bit less than 30, and up to 100 obviously when I was at altitude looking at the sky and whatnot. Towards the end of the campaign, in those last couple of missions, I think the lowest it got was about 40. And even when I was flying fairly low around target areas, I was still getting 60 frames per second, 50 to 60 frames per second. So overall, the performance was okay and certainly got better. And I think we can expect some more improvements in performance in the near future. For those guys who are struggling with performance, bear that in mind. Let's take a quick look at my specs though, because there's no point discussing performance when we're all using different hardware and we all have different settings. So I'll show you what I'm running. Here are my hardware specs. I've got a GeForce GT 980 Ti, which is not top of the line. My processor is an i5 6600, which is pretty good. And I deliberately actually went with an i5 rather than an i7 because I figure I could get faster speed for the same value and I don't need all the extra cores that you get from an i7. I don't do heavy graphics processing outside of gaming. So I don't really need loads and loads of cores. My machine is basically used for gaming and a bit of audio editing. Memory, I've got 16 gigs RAM, nothing too outstanding there. I do have both DCS and my operating system on solid state drives. And I don't go beyond 120 by 1080 resolution. There's really no need to. I know some guys love to run 1440p, but I think you start getting a bit of stuttering and whatnot once you get up to those higher resolutions. So I'm quite happy in 1920 by 1080. So possibly just as important is what are my settings in the sim itself. The key ones to probably take notice here of are the fact that I've got all the kind of lens effect / film effect stuff. This is the depth of field and lens effect. I've got those turned off. There's no point having that filmy stuff showing. My cockpit displays, I'm just happy to use 512 resolution. And then you can see I've got things like heat blur turned down. And you can have a look at this for your own self to see what settings I'm running. But most of the stuff is high to close to max, except for a few of the kind of video effect type things. Right, so let's have a quick chat about some more general stuff like immersion / realism / fun. I want to discuss briefly the AI wingman behavior. Now, at the start of the campaign, there were a few problems with getting wingmen to engage the right target. I don't know if it's possible to come up with a system where you can really specify this to AI like you could with humans, because you've got a limited set of options, obviously, with the communications menu. But there were a couple of missions early on where the second section just would not engage at all. And they spent the entire dogfight just circling around. Now that came to an end. By the time we got to the late missions after the update, that situation had been completely resolved. So now basically I think we can expect that the AI, the second section, will actually engage threats. And I found that it was quite helpful to use the AI sections to attack ground targets. It can be quite difficult to spot ground targets, especially here in the bocage where there's loads of little. The fields are very small and there's lots of vegetation all over the place. So to be able to get the AI to engage when they've spotted something, they dive down and shoot it up, and then it starts smoking. From that point on, it becomes a lot easier for the human pilot to identify the targets and to engage them. Now, the other thing I found a little confusing, even disappointing, especially at the start of the campaign, there were a couple of missions where we dived down, or shall I say, crept up behind enemy formations, and we nailed one or two of the aircraft in the formation. Now, I don't mind being able to bounce a formation like that. That seems to me to be quite realistic. But in the specific videos that I'm talking about, the enemy formations just kept on flying as though nothing had happened. And I made a few comments to the effect that I thought that was a bit ridiculous. However, I am going to reverse my opinion. Since recording those early missions, I have gone back and reread the 2 chapters in Johnny Johnson's book, Wing Leader, that concern with this period of the war. And those chapters are entitled Normandy and Combat. And I'm going to show you a couple of extracts from that book right now, which actually tally up almost perfectly with what we saw in those campaign missions. So let's have a quick look at that now. So this here comes from page 231 of Johnny Johnson's book, and I'm going to read it. This is an engagement he had with some 190s, quite low over the bocage. So we'll start from the top of this main paragraph. Flying a few feet above the bocage country, I narrowed the gap between my Spitfire and the 190. His 3 comrades were still well ahead of him, and he was an easy target. I slid out to one side so that I would not have a low line astern shot, and pulled slightly above him to avoid some high trees as I concentrated on firing. I hit him with the first burst on his engine cowling. More cannon shells ripped into his cockpit, and the 190 plunged into the ground only a few feet below. We were over a strongly defended area, for as I pulled up into a steep climb, we were engaged by a considerable amount of light flak. Gaining altitude, I spiraled my Spitfire and caught a last glimpse of the remaining 3 190s. Oblivious to the fate of their comrade, they continued to streak away at low level. And after making quite certain that they were not going to return, the 2 of us flew back to St. Croix in a wide abreast formation. That's the first one. There's another one just coming up. Here's the second. This is from page 249 of the same book. And I want to basically start from about halfway down, where he says, I decided to take the squadron to patrol the Alençon area, since we knew that this Normandy country town was the supply center for von Kluge's 7th Army. And during the past few weeks, the Luftwaffe had attempted to protect it from the air attack. My hunch was correct, and we pulled off a pleasing bounce against a dozen Focke-Wulfs well below us. This time, the enemy pilots were taken completely by surprise. It was not until 5 had been shot down that the others turned to give battle. Now, the reason I point these 2 engagements out is that it makes it clear, actually, that often a number of aircraft were shot down before a bounced flight would actually realize what was going on. And in that first example, obviously there was a bit of distance between the lead and the trailing elements of the formation. But even as late in the war as mid-1944, we still have sections of aircraft being engaged and having section members shot down, and the other aircraft in these formations completely oblivious, apparently, to what is going on. So the AI behavior in the campaign here has not actually been, I don't think, that bad. And I think I can retract my disappointment in those early couple of missions where those enemy formations just carried on flying despite the fact that we'd already made our first pass. So let's summarize some overall thoughts on the campaign as a whole. I am someone who actually does not like playing single player flight sim. Since Cliffs of Dover came out 7 years ago or whatever it was, 10 years ago, I stopped playing single player flight sims, partly because Cliffs of Dover really didn't have a single player element. And I've been an online flight simmer exclusively ever since. This is my first look, really, at the single player side of flight simming in a long time. And I found it very entertaining. I found it quite time consuming, which is good because I don't like the idea of getting through single player content in a couple of hours. I think anything that's single player content needs to give you at least 10 hours of entertainment, which this campaign will do. We've already discussed at length some of the bugs and problems with the campaign. Much of that is actually related to the fact that the Normandy map, assets, and whatnot are not yet optimized, and there's still a number of developments that are still required with the platform. Bunyip has clearly put a lot of time into researching this campaign, and there are parts of it which actually correspond very well to some of the pilot memoirs that I've read of this period. So if you are a single player flight simmer, if you like the Warbirds, and if you have the Spitfire, then I think this is a pretty good purchase. What I would say is also that I think we can be fairly confident about some improvements in performance, both in terms of the campaign and to the platform over the coming period. So for those guys who are struggling a little bit with performance, I think you can expect that to improve. One last thing I would say just for Bunyip is, can you please seriously consider the airfield layout just a little bit more? I am quite surprised to see so many objects and vehicles parked in the middle of the field. One of these screenshots will show that in just a second. Now, I can't be absolutely sure about this, but I suspect most of the... Yeah, here we go. Here's an example of vehicles parked. You can see guns in the background there. Most of these fields would have been very clear of objects. They would have tried to make the maximum area of space available for aircraft to land and take off, particularly landings, because it's a forward landing airfield, and there are going to be lots of aircraft returning with battle damage. There we go. That's what I'm talking about, right behind the Spitfire there. All those guns. That's in the middle of the field between the runway and the taxiway. So if you could get rid of those, maybe move them out to the perimeter, that would be marvelous. I know they're there just as eye candy. They're not actually there because no enemy aircraft coming over the base. But it just makes using the field in an emergency situation just a little bit more difficult than I think it needs to be. Anyway, I had a lot of fun flying this campaign, and I'm pretty sure that I will be buying the next campaign, which will be a P51 campaign. I'm not quite sure what our expected release date is for that, but I'm looking forward to it. In the meantime, I'll be uploading more material from online, and I'm about to engage in a cooperative campaign in the Vigan with some of my squad mates. Fat Ben, who's a member of 54, is currently putting together a campaign for us to fly in the Vigan, so I'll hopefully be uploading footage of that on a play-by-play basis as we work our way through. There we go, Epsom campaign's done. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're not too bored of these 10 or so screenshots repeating themselves over and over again. We'll see you again shortly, everyone. Bye for now.